the time to speak. What I'd just really like to talk about is nothing's been mentioned about business rates in terms of the income stream for the local authority. Now, at this moment in time, if you look at the medium-term plans that the authority has produced over the last couple of years, the income from business rates has dropped from 98 million for the 4 years to 16 through to 2020 to 87 million. In the same time, council tax has increased from 164 million up to 180 million. Now, could it be said that simply the failings of the local authority to attract businesses and to tap into that revenue stream has just made them be lazy and increased council tax during the period?
I would disagree with that, and the reality is that the business rate is set by government and has actually been rise by a lot more than the council tax. I'm not sure what we recognise the figures that have been quoted.
Okay. Well, they're in the medium-term plans that have produced over the last 3 years. The other thing that I'd just like to talk about, and I have mentioned this to Nick Wallace on a separate occasion on his own blog, is the fact that if you look at where we are at this moment in time, we're in a bad place. We all knew we were in a bad place. It was no surprise. Everybody knew that. If it was a Labour government, if it was a Conservative government, that was going to be cut. These cuts have been known for a number of years. If you look at the total income that the council has forecast over the last 3 years, for the same 4-year period, the total revenue has gone from 306 million for the 4 years to 314 million. So we've known about it. So why hasn't the general population, the residents of Darlington, been engaged earlier? So we've been able to make decisions. You've decided to make decisions for the population of Darlington. Yes, sorry.
In terms of in terms of when we knew what, we didn't even know the days of, we didn't know the amount of this year's settlement until the middle of January. So in terms of what we knew 2 years ago, what we knew at the back end of last year, we have asked, and one of the reasons we're going through this process is that we've asked for a 4-year budget settlement. In order to do that, we have got to get an agreed medium-term financial plan that goes over those 4 years. If we do that and submit it by October, then what the government is saying to us, whether they mean it or not, is they will give us a 4-year settlement, as much as they will guarantee. That means that whatever we agree later this year, around the end of June, should be the budget for the next 4 years. Now, every year we hold one of these events, and we have done that for the last 6 years. So I don't think it's fair to say we haven't engaged with the public. And there are many people in here who I've seen at previous events. Admittedly, there are a lot of new faces, but there are people who come to these events quite regularly. So I don't think that's a fair criticism of how we've handled it.
No, I don't think you can gauge the population of Darlington to the extent that you have now, because of the fact that there's such strong feeling within the town. If you talk about the 4-year settlement, the forecast numbers that are being used by the council come from the LGA. Now, the LGA with a 4-year period effectively said that, okay, you're going to get 34 million. And that's been used in the forecast for the last 3 years, so that's where my comment comes from, in terms of, you've known about this. There's no coincidence that there was a general election last year. You could have talked about before the general election, but we all know what would have happened.
So the general election has actually got nothing to do with this council and how it sets its budget. I'm talking
about engaging the public. That's what I'm talking about, is the fact that you've only really engaged the public to the extent that you have now, and that's because of the real feeling of it, because you potentially, there are a lot of obviously statutory reductions that are going to happen, but potentially you're going to rip out what really means to the people of Darlington, which is the libraries, there's potentially selling off the market to a third party. You've got to ask yourself, why does the Dolphin Centre lose £750,000 per annum? Why? Nobody can explain it. But therefore, is the building not fit for purpose? I don't want to take too much people's time, but is the building not there fit for purpose, and we need to have a model which is fit for purpose, and isn't going to cost money year on year on year?
Well, that's a job you decided to do.
I'm telling you that. You ass.
Oh, sorry, Harry.
I'm a member of the People's Parliament here in Darlington. And in the People's Parliament, we have been talking quite a lot on different subjects. And the main subject we have had on our minds for some time now are the cuts that are going on in Darlington. And we would like one of your cabinet members who are available to come and speak to our Parliament about the cuts, because a lot of us are not just quite sure how to put our questions across. I know Councillor Golden very well, and I know Councillor Waller, but I just feel that the People's Parliament, I want you to know why all these cuts are being made. Now, I've heard of one today, before I left home, is they're going to cut the open hours. They just threw what is a nod, because I'm not quite sure, because the chap I live with is going to the bridge, and he's not quite sure just what's going on. But as far as I'm concerned, if Councillor Dixon had agreed to send one of his colleagues to one of our Parliament meetings, we'd appreciate that.
Yeah, so absolutely not a problem. Lady, that was body more than Neil. And then Lady.
Hi. Children's Services was deemed as inadequate by Ofsted in 2015. Page 9 states that the Council needs to do more to make sure that all children are getting the help they need early enough. Ofsted summarised that the service for children needing help and protection Darlington is inadequate. Ofsted also summarised that services to ensure that children are safe was deemed inadequate. Mr Harker earlier on has said that vulnerable children were a priority, yet the early support service, which looks after up to almost 40 very, very vulnerable families and children in this town, is being removed. Can you explain why, please?
What we did say was that we were reviewing that with the NHS, and we'll get back to you when we've got details on that. But that service is being reviewed. To be perfectly honest, we can't afford to run it at its current level.
Are you prepared to negotiate or to change the level of service that is offered?
We're talking to the NHS as we speak about it, yeah. And there'll be, Paul, leave us your details or contact me of Veronica or Cindy directly to children and come and meet us and discuss it on a one-to-one basis if that helps.
It will do, yes, thank you.
Sorry, Neil, Matthew, sorry.
Thank you. A couple of questions for Steve Harper of your slides early on there. Looking at the proportion of government grant to council tax and revenue. I was reading a blog from a Wigan councillor who was talking about how I think 70% of their spending came from council tax and the rest from local government grants. Could you explain how Darlington was so reliant on central government grants for your spending as opposed to other local authorities?
And explain the politics of it, really. In the past, I would suggest that local governments tended to fund local authorities predominantly on the basis of need and how you define need is open to discussion, but typically they would provide local authorities that they felt had levels of deprivation higher than other local authorities, they provide more funding. I think what the coalition government is doing is really funding more on a per capita basis, so local authorities will get the same amount of money per head. And that, in my view, doesn't really reflect the fact that some local authorities have much higher levels of need in terms of deprivation. There may be local authorities that have high, for instance, high levels of older people living in there and might require support. So I think the way that the funding of local government is drifting towards is much more purely on a per capita basis rather than actually reflecting the need of particular local authorities. So it means in the past there were great differences in terms of the proportion in any given local authority compared to another, as to whether a bigger or smaller part of it was through council tax or whether it's through grants. Typically, local authorities in the North East, where there are high levels of deprivation, then we were getting per capita large grants to reflect that fact. And the second thing to consider is that in areas such as the North East, the average council tax band is generally lower because the average income in a household is lower, and therefore the ability for a local authority to raise council tax is lower because that simply reflects the wealth that there is in the local population. If you look at some of the boroughs in the South East, which are much wealthier in terms of the residents, their ability to raise council tax is much greater, and hence over time there's been a huge difference in terms of what the split is between council tax and government grants. And I think what we're seeing now is a drifting towards probably similar proportions in terms of how much is council tax and how much is government grants. And what it's really meant is that local authorities that have high levels of deprivation are seeing as a percentage much greater proportion of their government grant being withdrawn than authorities that are serving a population that has lower levels of deprivation.
Thanks. The second point was you talked about when you were talking about the core spending, that the council, what you must do was 87.5 million, but then you said that also includes things that you think is good to do. What is the actual bottom line of the must-do figure? Because that wasn't quite clear.
If you've got to figure out how to get it to the 87 million essentially covers things that we must do, plus services that in part is large about breaking even rather than making a large income stream. So that 87 million does cover both in terms of what revenue, what budget we need to fund that, those two elements.
Okay, thanks.
There's so much I'd like to address, but I can only ask you a few questions. It's just like the gentleman before was saying about capital expenditure. You said that bookstore in car park, for example, wasn't statutory. Now I believe that went over, I think it was £7.2 million that cost it. That was only 2 years ago. It went over budget by something like 800,000. I haven't got figures for the pedestrian scheme, but that was similar. If you can screech your face through, it's all correct. Okay, fair enough. But it seems like the pedestrian scheme, that this small business came out, I remember it, and they said that we don't want it. It won't improve the town whatsoever. And if anybody's got eyes, they've only got to walk around the town centre, they can come with me and I'll show you all the empty shops. So you certainly haven't improved business. The other thing I would like to address is what no one has addressed is the lady up there at the front. It's on more than the Prime Minister.
Yes.
And it's one example, because I know a lot of people who are passionate about the library, but I'll just bring it quickly. £779,000 to bring it into the Dolphin Centre. How's that going to save money? And then you've got £120,000 to maintain the South Park. Who are you getting? They've got the grass way, really. Another, I think it's 50,000 for Wild Fowl. It's a one-off payment. Come on, you must really think we are stupid. And my council tax, by the way, I'm going to have to find an extra £70 to pay that council tax. It's gone up by another 4%. And looking at the debt, it costs £3.1 million to service that debt. And yet you spent £7.2 million on a car park you didn't even need. So what happens the following year? If the government cuts the funding again, I'm going to have to find more money to pay my council tax. I won't be able to afford to live in my house. It's ridiculous. And Bill, how much are you on? 40, 50,000? Yes, you are, because I've seen the figures. It's ridiculous. And I could go on and on and on, and nothing will change, because all this is lip service. And these cuts that you're mentioning is just a smoke screen, because these have been completely inadequate. And children's services is an absolute disgrace. The reason why Quadrant had to come in was because the government were that worried by the Ofsted report, because it has failed. Since 2012, there's been no improvement in children's services. And again, and failing again and again, you fail to mention that. And let me tell you everybody in this room, 2020, I'm running for councillor as an independent, and I'll not take a salary, and that's all I'm going to do. justify your wage.
It's the rate of the job, it's what...
No, it's not, man.
Well, it's also less than I used to earn before I took this job on. I took a pay cut to do this job because I enjoy the job. I think it's a worthwhile job.
I've never been to one of these meetings before, right? You've justified 60 years of £25,000 for a moment for what half Darlington knows here. You've rubbed him off there. You're a disgrace, man. Yes, you're a disgrace. I think you should look at your position. You justify that and you shut the library. You're totally out of touch with the Darlington public.
We'll go on now. That is the answer. Most people should stand for council.
I just want to make a brief. Can anyone hear me? Right. Can I make a brief comment about the car park? The fact is, we've got a private sector developer that's invested circa 30 million to create a cinema leisure complex, right? Create 500 jobs, okay? And we borrowed some money, which will be funded from car parking revenue to service that facility. I tell you what, I'll vote for it every time, right? Because what that development will do, alongside creating jobs for people of Darlington, will increase the footfall of our town centre. To say our town centre is dead on our feet is dead wrong, right? The reality, may I finish, and then you can have your say. From my perspective, right, all town centres are facing challenge. To have the private sector put their money where their mouth is and invest 30 million here, which will have the effect of creating jobs and increasing footfall, which is what our traders want to see, is not a bad thing for me.
Yeah, just briefly, Bill, because the question was made about senior management costs. I think Steve outlined, I'm not sure if Steve outlined, but in the last 2011 to 2015, £2 million was taken out of senior management costs, and within this budget there's at least £300,000 coming out of senior management costs. And when there are cuts to be made and savings to be made, understandably, one of the first things that people look at is, well, how do you remunerate managers? Not everyone in a local authority can be frontline staff, valuable obviously though they are. You also need people to coordinate, to manage, to reconfigure services, to ensure best value is being delivered, to ensure procedures are in place, for example, in child protection and adult protection, so kids aren't dying and adults aren't being abused. So there have to be people who are better paid, who are remunerated to do those very complicated, high-end tasks at the end, often of their career, towards the end of their careers, and those who are frontline staff. You need a mixture of both. And the reality is, thinking about children's services, one of the issues that came through is, one of the comments Ofsted made to Darlington was, actually, you've taken too much out of senior management. I'm afraid you need people. The chief executive and the directors in this authority earn about the going rate when you look at other local authorities in the region and in the rest of the country. It's a price that is essential when you're running a multi-million-pound business where lives and services are at stake on a day-to-day basis.
What I'm hearing is that a lot of money is being taken out of preventative services, which I think is quite short-sighted. I come from a big local authority, and what they were doing in children's services was ploughing money into preventative services, trying to have a looked after children reduction strategy, because one looked after child costs tens of thousands of pounds a year. You can have children, one child per week in a specialist placement can cost £5,000, so it does not make good financial sense to pull all the money out of these homeless and mental health children's centres, which, what's going to happen is you're going to have more children coming into care, you're going to have more people homeless, which is surely in the longer term going to cost the council more money.
Has constantly spent more on homelessness and preventing homelessness than anywhere else in the country. We're above the national average. I was chair of housing for 20 odd years, and you know, the housing stock in this town is first class, and so have the homeless services been over that period. And the national reduction since 2010 has been about 45%. Ours hasn't reduced anything like that. But we're between a rock and a hard place. I accept what you say. Someone who for 20 or 30 years worked as a social worker specialising in child mental health. You know, I do know what happens when you don't invest in preventative services, which is why the position we're in is absolute madness. We are storing up problems for the future, but we have got the finite budget that we've been given. And this conversation is about how do we make that go as far as we can. Have we as Cabinet, and I've never said that we made all of the right decisions, we've never argued that. What we've said is we want to have a conversation with people about that, and about is there a different, a better way of doing this. And to give credit to my colleagues, and you know, to me, this is the only council in the North East where you can do that. No other council is holding anything like this kind of event. But I think it's worth it because I think it gets people involved, and that is what's needed. But your core question is dead right. We are not investing in our future. Therefore, we're going to pay for it down the line. But the council is where it's at. What can we do? What would the suggestion be?
Well, I don't know, because I think it was in this mess.
To be fair, now it's the council. I think, yeah, Guy, Gabet, and Guy.
Thank you. Like maybe other people in here, I was born in Darlington. I live in Darlington. It's unrecognisable from the town I grew up in. I can understand a lot of what's been said, and I think one of my big beliefs in life is the more you depoliticise things, the better. So I can understand all the issues about government withdrawing funding, all the rest of it, but what I feel I want to hear from my council, to whom I pay the money every year, is hope. And it's at the moment, to misuse a term, it's a council of despair. I often put myself in the guise, I'm a businessman. I've got 5 possible towns where I can locate my new factory. I'm sitting in the King's Head having breakfast, and my view of Mr. Pease's statue is obscured by an awful fairground attraction and something selling German sausages. It's appalling. This town is all about, as you rightly say, Bill, volunteers. We do some of it ourselves. It's full of good people. Stop politicising it. Give us a bit of hope. Because everything I've experienced in the last few years in Darlington, whether it's the Arts Centre, Feetham's, the library, the market, is you've spent loads of money on what I never wanted, and you've closed all that I did want. Please give us some hope, because the only way you're going to get more money in is more council taxpayers, and the only way you're going to get more council taxpayers is more people investing in the town and doing it like that. Please give us some hope.
But if I could just come back at you, I partly agree with you, and I think for the last 5 years it picks up on the point of this is all news. Well, it's not news, because I've been in about 3 or 4 meetings in this hall, but my message, and colleagues have been with me on this, has been consistently, we've got some real serious stuff to deal with. I think it is much more serious now than it was in 2011-12. That's the first point. Second point, we haven't got all the answers, and I think we're big enough to say that. That's why we're having these conversations. But the third thing is, we shouldn't lose sight of our history, and also but we shouldn't lose sight of the need to have ambition for the town and hope, and be optimistic and encouraging good investments. You know, it's not a dirty thing to say attracting business in, creating jobs and creating wealth is a bad thing. And again, we're pragmatic enough to say we need to deal with the financial challenge that we face, look after the vulnerable, but in parallel, we do need to attract investment. We need to create jobs, and we need to create wealth for the people in the town. And my final comment is the fairground bill. We've got a real dilemma there, because in one sense, some people will walk past that and go, what on earth is that? But we've got traders saying, you need to do stuff to attract footfall, to attract people. So that's a tension. We could debate that one for about 2 hours.
Can I just, I don't want to take too much time. It's this politicisation of it all. The problem I have is, and it may be just the way the messages are given out, because my background is communication, giving people a choice between looking after the vulnerable or having an arts centre or library is far too polarised. It's utterly polarised. Because you make me feel as if I want to go and see Andy Fairweather at the arts centre and I'm against people getting help, it's not about that. And that's how you make it sound. And I must be with the person who said, you've wasted so much money on what I didn't want. I mean, I challenge you to put in the Northern Echo a breakdown in words that a 10-year-old can understand, because that's what you should be able to do, of how that debt has been accrued. That's what people want.
Yeah.
And would you do that?
Yeah.
Do that?
If the echo can.
Yeah.
Well, no, I'm sure they can, because we are where we are, but to have it, I mean, Portsmouth City Council, what's deprivation there? They're going into reserves to get over this rough period. I mean, I find it, I used to run my own business, and I find all this finance approach unbelievable and amateurish, to be frank. Thank you.
Just on the point you're making about, I think you just started politicisation, so putting vulnerable people against the arts sector. I mean, yes, that's the decisions we're having to make. We do provide services that are for vulnerable people, but we also provide services that are things that are nice to have. We have a limited amount of money, and we do have to make that decision about balancing between protecting vulnerable people, but also providing things that make this place nice. And we have to somehow make decisions as to which is more important and how we get the balance right. And I don't think that's a political process. It's just about the council provides a whole raft of services. We have a lot of money, and between us we have to decide which of them we choose to fund and which of them we don't. And that's the reality of what councils do.
Hi, my name's Phil Sculthorpe, and I've been a resident of Darlington for a long time. I've only recently retired. I want to give you a bit of toffee, because you've taken a lot of stick. I was studying from the public meetings trying to defend the indefensible, and at least you're doing it. I don't think you did a very good job tonight, but at least you're doing it. I just want to echo a couple of things that man said. I think what you are presenting this in a way that makes it a very polarised argument. I totally understand that you've got some statutory services that you've got to maintain, but I don't think you're actually presenting this in a way that makes it very easy for people to engage, or a way that doesn't actually make people take polarised sides. So I would ask you, as one thing to take away from these meetings, is think very hard about how you continue to have the conversation. Because I don't think actually tonight there's more heat than light, to be honest, that's going on tonight. The one thing I would like to specifically ask you is about the voluntary sector. And I think it's again to try and capture a point that was over there. This is a great town, there are many volunteers. You've made the point that you are going to have to reduce the money into the voluntary sector. I'd be very interested to know what process you'll go through to decide how you will use the money and how you will decide which voluntary sector areas you would support and which you won't in the future?
Just before I bring Andy in, yeah, fair comment. Nobody ever said that we would get it right. We are trying, but what I will take you up on is that we get it at the end. Any advice on how we do this would be gratefully received, because this isn't the easiest gig.
No, I accept that. And you should at least take toffee for the fact that you do it.
Well, can we get Andy, not Paul.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good point, and that's actually, that's going to be a work in progress about engaging about engaging the voluntary sector in the coming months, just to understand it. And we know completely that we do impact assessments on the impact of all the cuts, and we know that those impact assessments in relation to the voluntary sector are not ready yet. You know, we've done a desktop exercise now, and we need to hear from them, for them to tell us, because we can only guess. If I said a voluntary sector organisation that was receiving £10,000 off us is no longer going to, we can only guess what the impact is at this point in time. So we need to understand that more. But I'm very keen on being able to say we've got an open door here, and we want to hear from them, and we understand that they do a hugely valuable job. I've already said about in terms of priorities, you know, we're presenting an ad back of £50,000 for benefit advice and welfare advice, but that's an ad back, and that's for us to evaluate when we've heard what you've had to say.
I'm conscious, yes, lady there, I'm conscious that we've not got to leisure, which is better not being a legal bond. And that's what happened this afternoon. Are people happy that after this next question, or next two questions, we move on to the next presentation on leisure, which will include the library and the other stuff? Because that's getting pushed out the longer we go around on this. Fair play? Two more questions then the next presentation.
Okay. I just want to address, Chris said about the private sector investment, and he's so proud and he's so happy that people invested. Obviously, yeah, that's a good thing, and it's bringing 500 jobs, he said. But at the cost of how many jobs we've just lost, if you could physically go into someone's home and see what they're going through that's lost a job, and knows that they're going to be made redundant at the moment with all the cuts in Darlington, I think then you would have that smirk wiped off your face with patting yourself on the back because you've got these private investors in. The other thing is, Councillor Bill Dixon, I've always had the utmost respect for yourself because I was born and bred in Darlington. I'm 38 now, and I've always looked up to you. I lost my dad when I was very young, but I've known where I could go to for help if I ever needed anything to do with where I live. I honestly feel that you still have the opportunity, whether it be look into your reserves, look into some financial aid you can access, and put a legacy on your commitments as councillor and with all your jobs that you all sit there with. It's amazing that, yes, you have given us the opportunity for consultation, but leave a legacy behind each of your jobs in this current state that Darlington's in, and salvage our library and prove to us that you helped us and you left a stamp on it.
It's a question about presentation around the social care cuts that you gave earlier, and I'm asking on behalf of somebody. It's regarding housing-related support, and it's just a concern how much that will impact on people where people have tenancies linked to the housing-related support, and that's a concern for the person who sat with me here tonight.
Well, I think we're all very concerned about the level of support. I think we've all worked very well in Darlington to help those who are less fortunate and more vulnerable in society. And that's why we're going to put so much back in out of the Futures Fund, and that will have a focus particularly on maintaining people's tenancy. What we want to do is work with people to keep their tenancy, to make sure that the house, if it's in the private sector, is well cared for, and also reduce antisocial behaviour around the tenancies. So, that will be the main focus.
I'm going to ask you this.
Sorry, it's just to clarify the concern is that some people live in tenancies where they don't have the floating support, they actually lose a house, essentially, which is what the concern is really.
Thank you, Bill. My name is Nick Wallace. I'm cabinet member for leisure and local environment, which includes this building, Eastbourne Sports Complex, the parks and gardens. It includes street scene. It includes the highways. It includes the railway museum, events and festivals, a lot of the heritage and the cultural budget. It's fair to say, and members of the audience will have picked up, that the greater part of my portfolio is not covered, is not statutory. It is discretionary, but it is hugely valuable, so it falls into that £12 million bracket that Steve outlined earlier. But it is, a lot of the services are universal, and they are well known, and they are well loved by the people of the borough. If I could have the first slide, please, Steve. So, as my colleagues have done, I'm going to set out what, as far as in these proposals, what is the core budget, plus the added back-end elements from the Futures Fund, that £2.3 million that we have to spend on non-discretionary sort of add-backs into the budget. These are the proposals. Firstly, the President was speaking there about legacy. What is your legacy going to be out of this terrible time for local government? Well, Civic Theatre is one of those legacies. We've attracted a £5 million, we're hoping to have confirmed a £5 million grant for refurbishing our glorious Edwardian 1907 Signor Pepe Theatre. It will be the Hippodrome once more, and it will be the pride not just of Darlington, but of the North East as an example of legacy.